So the verse translates, austerity of speech consists in speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and not agitating to others, and also in regularly reciting Vedic literature. Okay, so this is the purport, it's a short purport by Prabhupada. One should not speak in such a way as to agitate the minds of others. Of course, when a teacher speaks, he can speak the truth for the instruction of his students. But such a teacher should not speak to those who are not his students, if he will agitate their minds. This is penance as far as talking is concerned. Besides that, one should not talk nonsense. The process of speaking in spiritual circles is to say something upheld by scriptures. One should at once quote from scriptural authorities to back up what he is saying. At the same time, such talk should be pleasurable to the ear. By such discussions, one may derive the highest benefit and elevate human society. There's a limitless stock of Vedic literature, and one should study this. This is called penance of speech. So again, the verse is, austerity of speech consists in speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and not agitating to others, and also in regularly reciting Vedic literature. Anudavega karambakyam satyam priya hitam chayat swadhyaya vihyasanam chaiva vanmayam tapa uchate. So this is chapter 17, which is called Divisions of Faith. And this chapter is one of the three chapters that focuses on the three modes of nature. So we first hear about three modes of nature way back in the second chapter, but Krishna only touches the subject there. But in chapter 14, he describes the three modes of nature. And in chapter 17, he describes again the three modes of nature. And in chapter 18, he describes the three modes of nature, which will be the next chapter. So he describes different things in the modes of nature in all these three segments. In the chapter 14, he talks about the qualities, the conditioning, the manifestations when increasing, death duration, result, and developments, as well as progression. In this chapter, in chapter 17, he talks about worship, food, sacrifice, austerity, charity. And in the 18th chapter, he talks about renunciation, knowledge, action, work or understanding, determination, happiness, and awareness. Okay, I'm sure you all got all that. At any rate, the idea here is that Krishna likes to put things in the categories of the three modes of nature. And as far as I can tell, only in the Vedic literature do we hear about this whole construct or conception of three modes. And as I've said before, understanding the three modes helps us to have a toolkit for discovering whether things are beneficial or not. And if we learn about the three modes of nature, we learn how they work, what they are, we can evaluate things, people, situations, attitudes, and all the things that we see around us and discover what's helpful and what actually is not. What we should actually work towards and what we should work our way away from. So this is like a toolkit, the three modes of nature. And it's not mentioned in any other religious or of any other kind. Maybe Buddhist literature picks it up a bit, but of course they take broad swaths of what comes out of Vedic literature and just bring them into Buddhist literature because the Buddhist system grows out of the Vedic literature. So one of the things that you will discover as we talk about these various different things in the three modes of nature is the mode of goodness is the one that we are given the push to try to mold our lives into. The mode of passion and ignorance we are trying to learn to avoid like the plague, because they are the plague, actually, from a mental point of view. And it's interesting that recently we've been discussing in Srimad Bhagavatam this idea of the Supreme Lord, and we've talked about why does the Supreme Lord come? The question is asked in the first canto. The sages at Naimisharanya, they ask Sutta Goswami that this is verse 1.1.12. Sutta janasi badram te bhagavan sattvatam pati devakyam vasudevasya jato yasya chikirshaya. All blessings upon you, Sutta Goswami. You know for what purpose the personality of Godhead appeared in the womb of Devaki as the son of Vasudeva. So this is the question that they're asking. Why did Krishna appear in the womb of Devaki as the son of Vasudeva? And of course, most will immediately think of Bhagavad-gita, the yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata bhutanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamiham paratranaya sadhanam vinashya chaduskritam dharma samstapanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. So these verses are explaining why the Supreme Lord comes, but actually the answer to this question is a little bit different. And the answer is in the next chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam. That's chapter 1 of Canto 1. This is chapter 2 of Canto 1. And the ultimate verse of chapter 2, we hear this. Bhavyayati esha sattvena lokan vai loka bhavanaha Lilavattaranu rato devatirya. Thus the Lord of the universe maintains all planets inhabited by demigods, men, and lower animals. Assuming the roles of incarnations, he performs pastimes to reclaim those in the modes of pure goodness. So, this is the point of tangency here. He assumes the roles of incarnations and he performs pastimes to reclaim those in the mode of pure goodness. So those in the mode of goodness are more eligible to be able to be reclaimed by appreciating the pastimes of the Supreme Lord. Those in the modes of passion and ignorance are less likely to be entranced or even attracted to the pastimes of the Supreme Lord. So the Supreme Lord does indeed come to reestablish religion, as is mentioned in 4th chapter of Bhagavad-gita, and he does indeed come to destroy the demons and to also deliver the pious. But here we're learning that he comes to reclaim those in the modes of pure goodness. So that's the answer to the question why it was that Krishna advented himself and took birth in the womb of Devaki as the son of Vasudeva. So the mode of goodness is the easy launch platform to the spiritual world, whereas the modes of passion and ignorance are not at all conducive to spiritual lifting off. And so that's why we learn about these three modes, and we learn to try to mold our lives to be more and more in the mode of goodness. And so this is why we're hearing these three different variations of different things. So as we said some time back, what are the modes? The modes are like currents in the world around us. these currents move us in various directions, just like currents in a swiftly moving river will move. They not only go in the direction that rivers flow, but there may be eddy currents which pull us in directions that are different from the main current flow. So in Satya Yuga and Treta Yuga, the main flow of the current of the whole world is more or less in goodness. But when we get to Dwapara and Kali Yuga especially, then the flow of the main current of the world is certainly not in goodness. The main flow is in passion, and there's a lot of ignorance mixed in there. So, therefore, if we do not make an effort to move against the modes of passion and ignorance, we will certainly just, by default, be swept along stream with the modes of passion and ignorance. And the modes of passion and ignorance are certainly not going to take you to a good place. And as we've said before, the mode of goodness predominantly gives you illumination. It predominantly makes you detached from the material world. It predominantly situates you in doing things for the sake of spiritual life and not for some material result. And the mode of goodness has a tendency for balance. Whereas the mode of passion is not at all like that. The mode of passion conditions a person to want fruit of result, to work for a specific goal, because that specific goal is going to benefit us materially in a specific way, and to be very attached to whether things turn out positive or negative according to our material estimation. The mode of passion is a mode where we just act and we don't think about the consequences, but we act with great force and great intensity, and therefore we are constantly experiencing the agony and the ecstasy of material life, mostly the agony. But the hallmark of the mode of passion is this up and downness, that one is one moment very intense and exalted that something is going their way, and then the next moment they're in the dumps because things are not going their way. And everything is calculated according to how people view me. Am I popular? Am I powerful? Am I seen as intelligent? Am I seen as a controlling influence? All these things are important in the mode of passion. Now, the mode of passion does not usually stay, because someone living in the mode of passion will eventually be dropped down into the mode of ignorance, because the mode of passion, there's a burnout potential. And so the more a person is focused in making their statement on the world in the mode of passion, the more intensity that they run the treadmill, the quicker they burn out. And once they burn out, they have fallen into the mode of ignorance. And the mode of ignorance is not fun. The mode of ignorance is where one is no longer clear, one is no longer functional, one has much bad karma to work their way through, and therefore the mode of ignorance is like a mode of convalescence, a mode of some kind of dysfunction. And of course, in the mode of passion, one is not motivated and not likely to be motivated either. And one is in such a dark cloud of misunderstanding that nothing at all is clear. So that's why we have to avoid the mode of ignorance at all costs. It's definitely something that's not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. Let me move up here a bit. So we are trying to move towards the mode of goodness. Now, in this chapter, of course, it started off with the question, this chapter is actually the 17th chapter, about Arjuna asks the question, what about people who worship the Supreme Lord but they don't do it according to religious scriptures. What are they? Because in 16th chapter, which was the previous chapter, Krishna described that there are divine people and demoniac people. And by demoniac, Krishna has indicated those who don't care for scripture. And that's really the simple dividing line. People who don't want to live according to any pattern outside of themselves. They just want to do what they feel they want to do. So this is the demoniac tendency. So this is the difference then between divine and demoniac. The divine, they try to understand scripture and they try to mold their lives according. Whereas demoniac people, they don't try to understand scripture and they certainly don't mold their lives accordingly. So Arjuna seemed to feel that there is some third platform. So he said, what about those who they are interested, at least they say they are, interested in understanding the Supreme, but they do not mold their lives according to any understood or recognized scripture. What about them? So that's where this whole chapter comes into existence. Krishna is answering that question. And he explains that the answer to that question is that they form various religious sentiments based on the modes of nature. So their understanding is somewhere filtered through a spectrum from the mode of goodness down to the mode of ignorance. So there are ways of thinking, philosophies, religious, and other types of organizations, which are to some extent more in the mode of goodness. Some religious or philosophical groups are in the mode of passion, and some are actually in the mode of ignorance. So this is where we get the answer to why there are so many varieties of religions or so many varieties of philosophies in the world. Some philosophies are not really religious, but they're philosophies. So what are these things? And oftentimes each philosophy is understood as a plan for life. How should we live? What should we do? What should we avoid? So each philosophy or religion gives you a plan for life. And some of these plans are more in the mode of goodness, some are more in the mode of passion, some are more in the mode of ignorance. So that's how we get chapter 17 from chapter 16. That's what it grows out of. And now we begin to hear Krishna actually describing various qualities or various items in various modes. And as we said, the first thing that he described in this chapter 17 was sacrifice. Actually, no, food. No, even before that, worship. Here we go, worship. He described worship in the various modes, and he talked about food. You all read that. And then sacrifice. And now we're talking about austerities. But Krishna seems to stay with the idea of austerity longer than he does the others. And he describes three specific types of austerities. The first type is austerity of the body, which, if you've ever been to India, or if you ever talk to people who are very philosophically or religiously inclined, they have all kinds of ideas of what austerity is. And what Krishna says as austerities of the body are generally not what you would think of as austerities of the body. Does anybody remember what the austerities of the body were? They were, you must have discussed them 2 weeks ago or so.
Cold shower.
What's that?
Cold shower. Cold shower.
Cold shower. No. That's not what Krishna mentions in the 17th chapter. I'm bringing this up because you'll see that when I tell you what they are not what you would think they would be.
Cleanliness.
Yeah, that's one. That's actually one. But he remembers. Yeah.
Toxic foods.
Right. But that's not mentioned in 17th chapter.
Cleanliness. Oh.
Cleanliness, right. So he mentions that austerity of the body, this is austerity of the body, is offering respects to the Supreme Lord the brahmanas and the gurus, as well as elders like the parents and superiors, and celibacy, cleanliness, and what's the other one there? Simplicity and nonviolence. So we generally don't think of these as austerities of the body, but that's how Krishna categorizes them, as austerities of the body. To offer respect, which is, when you stop to think about it, this is a heavy austerity. In the age of Kali Yuga especially, we don't want to offer no respect to nobody, you know. we want to just kind of be respected, but we want to be the top gun, you know. So it's a heavy austerity in the age of Kali Yuga to offer respect to the Supreme Lord, or to the spiritual master, or to the brahmanas, or whoever. And then the other thing is that cleanliness, nonviolence of course means not killing animals to eat them. And we have also this idea of celibacy, which actually is an austerity of the body. But to practice celibacy, one has to have a complete lifestyle that supports celibacy. Otherwise, celibacy generally goes out the window. You know, that if you don't have an entire lifestyle that supports it, especially in the age of Kali Yuga, all I can say is good luck, you know, out there. It's just everywhere in the material world, anti-celibacy is celebrated everywhere, you know, on all levels and with all people at all times, in all social media and all theatrical and musical, artistic and whatever creation. Yeah. It's the king of everything. So you have to have a lifestyle that supports. So this is serious austerity. And of course, Prabhupada says celibacy also is not what you might think it is. That celibacy means not having sex outside of marriage. So so having sex within marriage is also considered celibacy. But generally speaking, in our modern world, we are taught, and from early age, that unless we're having a lot of sex, there's something drastically wrong with us. And so this is why this is called austerity of the body. So these were what Krishna described as being austerity of the body, that offering respects, to be clean, nonviolent, celibate, and what else? Anything else I missed there? Simple. Simple. So these are the austerities of the body. And now today, in this verse, we're talking about the austerities of the speech, or of words. So what were the austerities of speech that we just read today? Does anybody remember? Now we're going to deep memory here. Yeah.
Not speaking in a way that agitates others.
Right.
That's one of them.
That's one of them. What else?
Speaking in a way that
What's that?
agitates
Being pleasing and beneficial.
or disturbs.
Pleasing and beneficial, not speaking. Yeah. And what's
From the Vedas.
reading from the Vedas, and one other item. Truthful, beneficial, pleasing, reading from the Vedas. So these are austerities of speech. Yeah.
When she said not agitate
Right.
others, but when you advocate for justice,
right.
you're going to always get a reaction and people are going to get agitated.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you're going to be silent and not do what you have to do when there is injustice.
No. This has to be understood in context. The point, of course, is satyam priyam. You know, you speak the truth. Satyam priyam is pleasingly. So, as Prabhupada put here, actually it's interesting in his purport. Prabhupada said that one can speak to his disciples or followers, and one can agitate their minds. Because they have agreed that they are going to be accepting whatever it is the teacher says. However, to others one should not. Of course, in our world, there's absolutely nothing you say that wouldn't agitate somebody.
Right.
And all you have to do is look at the internet and see that anybody can say anything about anything, and it'll go viral, and suddenly they'll be losing their job or whatever it is, you know. And so these days, the snowflake consciousness is becoming pretty all-pervading. So no matter what you say, you're going to agitate somebody. But of course, when we speak, we try to speak the truth, and we try to back it up with the Vedas. And in this way, we know that although some people may be agitated, actually, in the long run, it will be a healthy thing. We can't refrain from speaking things because someone will be agitated. But I think one of the things that's really indicated here is we should not use the truth as a weapon. And we should not speak specifically to people who we know have very little chance of accepting what we say. So it's a good way to not waste an abundant amount of time, is to speak to people who you know are unlikely to agree with you. And in that way, if you have a relationship with people, then you can speak to them. But if someone has no relationship with you and they disagree, generally there's no point in continuing the conversation any length of time once you get to the point where you realize they're not accepting you and you're not accepting them, and let it be. So the truth should not be used as a weapon. Sometimes we know that saying the correct thing will be not necessarily we're trying to put the truth forward, more we are trying to dig at somebody by saying something about them that's cutting, which may in fact be true. But this is what we should avoid doing. We should avoid speaking the truth as a weapon. So this is a fine line. Prabhupada also talks in other places about the idea that sometimes one needs to speak the truth regardless of whatever reactions some people may have to it. So that's also there. But we just have to understand the context here. So the general idea is we should try to be interesting and pleasing when we speak the truth. We can be cutting when we're dealing with those who are people who have decided to be followers because they've accepted the idea that the spiritual teacher will tell them things that are maybe not so palatable, but that is the purpose of having a teacher. All teachers do this, because if teachers don't do this, the student doesn't grow, you know. The teacher is there to point out the deficiencies and defects in the student, and by doing so, then the student makes progress. So these are our austerities of speech. So I want to stop there and see if there are any questions about any of this a little bit, and then we can proceed a little further. Anybody? Yeah, right.
In the austerities of the body, there was not direct reference to what we eat, but currently under non-violence, we cover not eating animals. But what about avoiding onions and avoiding that is an austerity, but it's not specifically mentioned.
Right. Well, that gets into a kind of a side issue, but I'll briefly touch on it, that we are not necessarily vegetarians, we are Krishnatarians. So that means we eat what Krishna will accept. And just like anybody else, Krishna has things that he likes and things that he doesn't like. So even though we're not killing a higher form of life to eat an onion or a garlic, yum yum garlic. The vegetable of choice for people who like to be alone.
It's a natural antibiotic.
Right. But at any rate, the idea is that although we're not killing an animal, Krishna doesn't like it in his food. You know, using things for medicinal purposes is another category of things. But at any rate, the point is that we don't eat certain things because Krishna doesn't eat them. even though they are not necessarily animals or higher forms of life. But certainly Krishna will not accept animals when we offer food. So if you offer food and it's got animal flesh in there, Krishna won't accept it, so therefore it cannot become prasadam. And so in one sense we are not vegetarians, we're prasadatarians or Krishnatarians, We eat what Krishna eats. Other questions? Anybody have? Yeah.
Maharaj, I also heard this saying concerning the onion and the garlic. So if we are interested of controlling our senses, the garlic and it's agitated some of the senses.
Yeah, right. I don't want to get into a whole, Ayurvedic exploration of various. Right. And even in ISKCON, there's a whole, spread of opinions about garlic outside of a food context. It's pretty set as far as garlic within a food context. We don't accept garlic within the food context. Whether garlic is a good medicine or not, that's a whole other thing, and devotees have their spread opinions on that, so I don't want to go down that road today. But at any rate, the point is that we are trying to be nonviolent, and that means minimizing violence, and creatures that move, such beings are in a higher level of life than those that are animals, than those that are plants, or lower down on the chain. So therefore we should not eat them, and that's part of being nonviolent. So that's part of austerities of the body, to avoid those kind of foods. Yeah.
Do you think that respect being one of the austerities of the body has to do with, prostration?
Right. This is generally how it's done. Of course, one can prostrate and not mean anything by it. In some cultures, it's routine to do that. Among Bengalis, they just habitually prostrate themselves. But I wonder if it's just a cultural reflex. But at any rate, the idea is that it's supposed to indicate that someone is showing deference. And that it should go a little beyond that, where it's not simply just a gesture, but it indicates actually a willingness to hear, a willingness to adopt, etc., etc. So spiritual life starts with respect, and the kind of respect that understands that those who speak for the Vedas are not speaking their own ideas, but they're speaking from a larger context, and that larger context is ultimately the supreme. And that if we have read enough of the Vedas to be convinced that this is not some extraneous or whimsical development, that the Vedas are really the source of all knowledge, and then someone is trying to explain that source of all knowledge, then we respect them and what they are representing, and in that way our lives can benefit. Otherwise, if one doesn't have that kind of respect, even on a hypothetical level to begin with, then spiritual life is impenetrable. You won't make any progress at all. The Prabhupada says if you have a skeptical attitude towards the teachers, towards the literatures, then whatever someone does, you won't get any benefit from it. Like I mentioned one time, I was in New Zealand and I went to a man's house. We were going door to door selling Bhagavad-gitas and Srimad Bhagavatams, and I knocked on the door and I said, we're showing people Bhagavad-gita. Have you ever heard of Bhagavad-gita? And the man didn't answer. He just did this. And I came in the door and he had a bookshelf, and right on the bookshelf was the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita, the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad-gita, and about 7 other Prabhupada's books. And I thought, wow, this guy is really with it, And then he had those little index cards, in at least 5 or 6 of them in each book. And I asked, what is that? And he said, oh, that's where I disagreed with them. I was thinking, he went through every one of Prabhupada's books and found 5 or 6 places where he disagreed with Prabhupada, and he indexed it. I thought, that's some kind of Ripley, believe it or not, sort of, sort of a record, that somebody actually read the entire Bhagavatam, read the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita just to disagree with it and to be as specific as, which verse and which line he disagreed with, So that's kind of an indication of this whole idea of, having a skeptical attitude, not, at least for the time being, everything's a crapshoot. We don't know what's real or what's not until we plumb our way through it, until we wade into it. So, hypothetically, you accept the Vedas as being ultimate knowledge, and you check them out to see if they're consistent. You try the ideas in your own life. And after some time, you become again and again brought face to face with this idea that the Vedas are in fact consistent. You don't find any body of knowledge this big that keeps reminding you of its self-consistency over and over again. And then the ideas that it gives you are very practical. If you apply them, you see that your life changes. My life would have been very, very different if I had not accepted the Vedas. And I'm sure I would not be here at this point if I had not accepted the Vedas at an early point in my life. So I'm convinced that the Vedic literatures are not just some ancient, interesting parable that we can look at in some kind of examining the lore of the hoary past or something like that. This is actually something that's serious, it's real, it's tangible, it'll change your life. And it's consistent. So that's the whole thing. We hypothetically have to accept that, well, maybe it is like that. And then after making an endeavor to wade in there and wade through, after some time, we become more and more aware of the fact that the Vedas are self-consistent. They deal with a broad range of subjects, and they give you practical things that make your life better, like these three modes of nature we're talking about. You can ignore them, but once you actually see the three modes of nature working in your life, working in your friends' lives and your employers and the people you see on the street, the more you see the modes of nature, you think, wow, this is real. I need to be moving away, like, laying rubber on the pavement from the mode of passion and ignorance. This is not going to help me. Yeah.
So, tapas is discipline.
Right.
It's interesting that these goodness in speech is a tapas for us to do that, which makes it much easier for us to indulge, to be hurtful,
right,
to lie because it's convenient, all those things. So it's like a real discipline to follow these, and he's instructing us in goodness, because it's easier to be angry or to be rajasic,
right,
rajasic, and to spread ignorance, But this is because you brought the modes, so this is like instruction in.
Right. Unfortunately, in the mode, in say the Yuga of Satya or Dwapara, the general culture of the whole of society, this would have not been big news to anybody, nor would it have been so difficult to apply. But in Kali Yuga, where everything is totally upside down, not only is this unknown, it's unpracticed. So all of us have a tendency to do things the wrong way. And that's what spiritual life is recognizing what habits we have that are detrimental and what they should be instead. And then gradually we try to pull on this new way of doing things. And so we're changing our inside by changing our outside. But it works the other way around. We can change our outside by changing our inside too. So as our gradual purification happens by following Krishna consciousness, we discover that automatically our external habits are changing, even automatically. So there's a bit of both ways. We're changing the inside by changing the outside. We're changing the outside by changing the inside. So this is why we're learning about the modes. We learn what habits are going to help us in the long run, and which ones are going to sink us into deep doo-doo if we stay with them, So anything that smells of the mode of passion, it's, most of us are not attracted to the mode of ignorance except on Halloween, where everybody's attracted to the mode of ignorance, and it's like a sort of poster child mega weekend for the mode of ignorance. Halloween, but most people are not so attracted to the mode of ignorance. It's just kind of repulsive in some senses, and so you wonder, well, why are there people in the mode of ignorance? Because nobody gets there wanting to go there. You get there by going in the mode of passion and being blown out and falling into the mode of ignorance by default. So nobody tells you that the mode of passion sets you up for the mode of ignorance. Because the mode of passion is what is out there in bright lights and billboards, and it's attractive, We're doing things, we're getting things done. The Olympics, we've got the gold medal, we are going for the glory. We want to be in lights, we want to be the top one, we want to be the best in the field, we want to be world class, These are the, whisperings, actually they're not whisperings, they're the screams of the mode of passion. The mode of passion is beckoning us forward into certain destruction by, these kind of alluring hypercells, But if we go for the bait, we just discover we're on the treadmill. And then we watch year by year as the treadmill gradually gets faster and faster, and we get older and older and less able to deal with it until we fall on our face. And then welcome to the mode of ignorance. You didn't want it, nobody was attracted to it, suddenly here we are in the mode of ignorance. So that's why we have to avoid it. Yeah, Raphael.
Thank you, Maharaj, for coming and enlightening us. Just because agitation or speaking with people speaking with agitation doesn't mean that we can avoid it around us.
Right.
Just in the workforce, just in the jobs, right here is agitation.
People are expert at agitating them.
Exactly. They don't
People have PhDs in.
Exactly. They don't really filter anything. Actually, they take pride in being agitated.
Right.
And so, having said that, that actually affects my consciousness.
Right. Right.
Try to be, very serene about it. But sooner or later, it does affect you.
Uh-huh.
And then I became agitated, and then I started agitating other people without actually being aware.
It's like a pinball game where one steel ball hits another one and moves out.
Here I am, I'm thinking that I'm this spiritual guy, and then all of a sudden I'm agitating other people, and it's like, it's not a good thing. Is there a way, is it possible that we, as we are, can attract people that agitate us? Because
especially in this modern age, people make it their business to learn how to be agitating. It's just like here we're learning how to not be agitating. There are people who are on the other side of the polar opposite who are literally trying for a PhD in how to be agitating to others. So part of it is recognizing that they don't know what they're up to. They're just being pushed by the modes of ignorance and passion, and they're actually in some cases just playing a game. Some people are just seeing if they can push other people's buttons, they feel a certain kind of gratification when they get success in pushing other people's buttons. And it's very hard, actually, to deal with it. I know it's one thing to talk about it, of having people agitate your mind on purpose and being very skillful in knowing how to do it, and actually being able to just let it pass, And that's why, oftentimes, I talk about certain strategies that help with that that whole thing, and everyone has to fight it all the time, and you won't win every time. Sometimes they'll get it. They'll actually get through to you, and you'll go off and later on think, why did I actually let myself get baited? But it's a part of life. So you live and learn, and you try to do the best you can. You try to stay in the mode of goodness. One good technique is, if somebody really gets you agitated, is to change your breathing right away and don't respond right away. Because, even the military, they talk about what they call arousal. And we're not talking about sexual arousal here. We're talking about something else, Arousal is your emotional content, and it has to do with the amygdala and with the the limbic system, which is the emotional system in the human mind, or brain really. It gets pumping, and once it gets pumping, it's hard to shut it down. And so you can imagine what it's like being a soldier getting dropped in enemy territory. I can't imagine any kind of situation that could be more stressful than that, So the first thing they teach the soldiers is to change the way they breathe. Because, if you let it get you carried away, you'll be a victim of your own limbic system, your own tendency to respond. So what helps is just if you can delay the reaction, you can change your breathing. That helps a lot, because if you can react just a little later, you will see that your reaction is not really necessary. The person either doesn't know what they're talking about, or the person's actually playing a game with you, seeing if they can get you to go off, or whatever it is, So if you can catch yourself, that's good. And if you don't catch yourself, try to do better the next time around, because I don't win all the time either in these kind of things. It's easy to get caught up in a moment. Sometimes it happens when you least expect it. You're around people who you don't think it's going to happen with, and suddenly it happens. And you get caught off guard. You get sucker punched, as they say. Emotionally sucker punched. So you have to kind of say, all right, I went off, but I'll try to do better next time. But that's why we're trying to keep heading back towards goodness. We know that's the center line. We know that's the safe zone. Whenever we get pulled out of it, we think, all right, I need to go back, and so on and so forth. So that's how I would respond to your question. She had a question next.
Yes, hello. Well, I read the entire Bhagavad-gita about 11 years ago. I was living with a Krishna family. And I've been reading recently that if I hadn't read it with a guide, another person, that I really didn't read it. And I'm wondering what you think of that.
No, that's a very excellent question, actually. We talk about that all the time, because there's plenty of people who come into contact with Vedic literature in some way or another, but without a guide, one will certainly misunderstand it. There's just no two ways about it, And unfortunately, the more someone reads Vedic literature without a spiritual guide, the more likely they are never to understand it, what it really means. Because Vedic literature is vast, and we are already set up with misunderstandings. And we will think that the Vedas are reinforcing our misunderstandings, when in fact they're not. So that's why one needs a guru, and we say that Bhagavad-gita is understood in the association of Vaishnavas, and especially with the help of a guru. So if you're in the association of those who understand the Vedic literature, then they can help you to understand what you genuinely understand and what you think you understand, but it's actually a misunderstanding. So that's where it teases apart those two things. And spiritual knowledge comes with, as Prabhupada puts it, or the Vedic literatures in Bhagavatam, they put it the same way. You have book Bhagavat and devotee Bhagavat. So the devotees, they say what's in the book, and the book says what the devotees say. So the two reinforce one another. That's how you know that the person you're hearing from isn't just making it up as they go along, because you're actually reading it in an ancient literature. At the same time, when you come to that literature and something's foggy and not clear, it's the person who can clear it up for you, and then you know what's actually there. And that's what we talk about as a larger construct we call the parampara, or the thread that ties together all the Vedic literatures. There is a Siddhanta, it's called. So Vedic literatures, like all literatures, are made up of words. And words in every language have more than one meaning. Every single word can have more than one meaning. So therefore, if you string a huge group of words together, even just as a sentence, it can have more than one reading. And in the Vedas, that's acknowledged, that some Vedic verses can have many, many multiple meanings. And not all those meanings are actually true meanings. Some of those meanings we have to strike as being inadmissible or improper renditions of the understanding of that verse, whereas more than one might be agreed as being possible or as actually being acceptable versions. Because if you accept every meaning to every word, and you accept every possible meaning for every Vedic verse, you very soon get to the world of gobbledygook. There's nothing that you can say that you can't unsay. So that's not the way the Vedas are understood. They're understood by recognizing certain meanings and rejecting other meanings. And that's called Siddhanta. And it comes through disciplic succession. There is what I'm saying should be found in the Vedic literatures. And it was said by others before me, and it was said by A.C. Bhaktivedanta, it was said by people before him, and you can trace it back, that this isn't something new that someone came up with last week, that this is the same way of understanding that's gone down through many, many, not even just centuries, but even millennium. You had something you were going to say.
Thank you, Maharaj. So about the three modes of nature, I was wanting you to requesting you to talk a little about the distinction between engaging in one's time where one's trying to focus on sadhana, dealing with devotees, communicating with friends, people, not at one's job, trying to do that in the mode of goodness, and not just the mode of goodness, but for Krishna, and distinguish that from when one's doing one's duty. One's duty may involve a particular mode of nature other than goodness. It may be one's job to do that. And I'm thinking what's coming to mind is Arjuna. It seems, my understanding is Arjuna's job was to harness anger for Krishna to fight. I think, but for Krishna, and therefore you have the verse in Bhagavad-gita, what is it, 8.6 or 8.7 maybe? It talks about Sarveshu Kaleshu Mananusmara Yudhyacha. So Krishna says, fight, but while thinking, but while seeing me standing before you. So so my job, obviously, as an attorney, I mean, my job is basically to fight with people, but not physically, but that's my job. So I'm thinking, but to harness that energy in Krishna's service, that's the trick. And so even amongst the non-devotees, there's some understanding of how to use some passionate energy, but have control over it. So like I know there's one mediator, he was recently talking to me about how, there's this thing that you're engaging with other people, but it's really like a dance. So you're posturing one way, or you're saying one thing, but you're meaning another, and it's like a dance. Right. So you can engage in this harsh or tricky energy, which is usually done for fruitive purposes, but you can do it with a higher goal in mind. And then the trick is, so then when something happens which would press someone else's button and make them react, get them very agitated, can you keep your cool and still think of Krishna as standing before you?
Right. Well, I'm not sure what your question is completely, but I'll answer something, and then you can tell me whether I hit it or I'm off the mark, and we can go further into what you really wanted to hear about. One thing I like to do in these kind of particular, when we head in this direction philosophically, is make a distinction between what we call passion and what we call utsaha, or enthusiasm. Because one needs enthusiasm for devotional service, but enthusiasm and passion are not the same thing. So utsaha is enthusiasm and rajas is passion. So what is the central core item that we could label the mode of passion with? What would you say?
Passion? No, it's being attached to the results of the activity.
Exactly. Not just attached to the results, but attached to the results for yourself. So when one is acting strongly, as Arjuna had to do on the battlefield, he was not being passionate. He was being, as I would put it, he was being enthusiastic, because the result was for Krishna, you know. So if what you're doing is for your own aggrandizement, your own financial benefit, what you're doing is for your own particular prestige, if what you're doing is for your own political power, then that is in fact rajas. And as far as I can tell, under no circumstances is that ever good. However, to be enthusiastic, even to be clever, you know, even sometimes to use indirect means to accomplish something that is ultimately for spiritual benefit, that is not in the same category. So it always seems to boil down to what is the ultimate motivation. And, you know, oftentimes you think you have one motivation, and later on you discover it wasn't quite as clear or as clean as you thought it was. So that's why we have to keep re-examining ourselves. Because even in the so-called effort to push forward Krishna consciousness, the mode of passion will try to creep in there. And it's not something that is once and done sort of thing. You just have to keep re-examining to see if elements of the mode of passion have indeed crept in to your approach to Krishna consciousness. And it's not at all surprising when they do. In fact, it's kind of the way it generally works. And so you have to recognize it and grab it by the collar and throw it out again, you know. So it's something that we have to do constantly, is to re-examine ourselves and see if there's some elements to the way and the reason why we're doing something that are untoward, something we shouldn't be really focused on, something that we're doing maybe not for as altruistic or as spiritual reasons as we think we are. So we just have to constantly do that introspection. Because if we don't, we wind up kind of gradually moving further from the center of Krishna consciousness to the periphery, where we're kind of in that gray area. But to imagine that because we're not acting, that, you know, spiritual life is not about lethargy, and it's not about complacency. It's about dynamism. But dynamism is not the same thing as passion, although on the surface they do look similar. So that's where I say the dividing line is that the reason for which you're doing things is a deciding element. And we have to act strongly for Krishna. And that acting strongly for Krishna cannot be labeled passion. It's not rajas. It's utsaha. It's enthusiasm. Does that answer your question, or is there some other factor?
You spoke on the topic I wanted to hear you about.
Okay.
It wasn't really a question. It was a request for you to do what you just did.
Okay. So somehow it telepathically communicated. Yes.
Yeah, in connection with what you said, when in law or profession or as an advocate, you use truth as a weapon. It's all about finding the truth and using it so you...
Well, as a weapon to bring the truth to larger people, but not as a weapon to injure a particular individual.
Or to obtain what you want as an advocate,
right,
you fight, as you say.
Right,
so if not everybody, not all of us can be doing exclusively Krishna work like you are doing, you are devoted to that. So when we are in situations where, because of the career we do or the work we do, we have to fight and create agitation and use the truth as a weapon. I think that's a little bit what he was saying. I mean, how can you avoid being in the mode of passion when the work by itself to be successful requires that?
Right, as I was saying before, it all boils down to your motivation. When we talk about the good, actually in Srimad Bhagavatam, we were discussing 2 days ago, I went to that foreign country up there called Harlem. We took a subway way up there because that's where the new Yuga Dharma ashram is, and I gave class there. And they were reading from the very first of Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, first chapter. And there are 6 questions by the sages at Naimisharanya. And one of them is, what is the highest good? Prabhupada uses the Latin phrase there, the summum bonum, the highest good, So what is the highest good? And we discover that the highest good is for people to engage in the service of the Supreme Lord, basically. Whatever gives a person the indication, the inclination to engage in the service of the Lord is the highest welfare work. And there's no getting around that. There's no something that's almost as good. Because whatever you do, time and tide will have its effect. And there are things that come and go. And the world certainly could be better than it is now. But what's the fundamental reason why the world is the way it is? And the fundamental reason the world is the way it is because people have dirty hearts. And unless you address that issue, nothing else will make any larger, long-lasting, large-scale solution to anything. The thing that will change the world is to change that issue, dirty hearts. Of course, a good place to start is clean up your own. And then when you clean up your own, you can help other people, at least those who are willing to be progressive, to clean up theirs. And the more people who take part in this, Dyson vacuum heart cleaning ceremony, the more people who do this, the more the world will change for the better. And all the tributary, downstream corollaries, things that are related issues will all dry up. Just as when you cure the disease, all the symptoms go away. So the tendency is, in a modern world, to chase symptoms. And of course, sometimes the symptoms can be extremely disturbing. So in some cases, there is a need to directly address the symptom. But one should never address the symptom without addressing the disease, which is the same way our modern medical system works. It addresses the symptoms without addressing the disease. And so in social welfare, the highest welfare is to convince people to gradually start a purifying process in their lives that will help them, not only today, not only in a particular way, but it'll help them for the rest of their lives and anyone they come in contact with. And for all we know, we may contact someone who will do 10 times what we will do in spiritual emancipation of others, So therefore, this is why it's called para upakar, the highest welfare work. Because what we're doing here, it may not look like we're addressing the social issues of injustice and pollution and crime and corporate control and all these other nasty things that are part of the world that we live in. But we are. We're addressing the problem at the very core. at its very root. And we're doing it with tools that will actually create people with purer hearts. And the more we do that, the more the influence will spread to a much larger degree. And on top of it, when the influence spreads enough, Krishna himself will step in. Now, this is not just magical thinking, as sometimes people may think, that what we're talking about here is that when we have done our level best, for whatever ways we can think, to reach out into the world and help people to understand this message. Some will take it, some will not. Some will take it but be unable to practice it very deeply. And all those things are not necessary, not essential. But if we make the effort to get it out there, more and more people will hear about it, more and more people will start to embrace it. And when they do, the whole character of the world will change automatically. Just as when a person is cured of the disease, the symptoms automatically abate without having to address each one separately. So that's why sometimes there's a necessity to deal with a very disturbing symptom directly, but we should never get lost in the symptoms and forget about the disease. And I think that's what I'd like to reply or respond to what you just said. Okay, so are we actually at the moment now where we're supposed to begin Kirtan 2?
Yes, Maharaj.
Wow, I'm actually on time. So this was the official schedule that our Sasha just gave me that I assume is coming from you, but...
everything he does comes from me, ultimately, or from the real boss over there.
Okay.